no professional. You know me.
You and me both, man. I'm just here, you know.
Here to rock. Here to fuck
That's
shit
right.
up. I was hesitant to use that one at work now, but somebody said it before I did the other day, and I was like, sweet. Doors
Oh, did
open.
they? Hell
Yep.
yeah.
And it was one of like senior leadership. So I'm like, I'm good to go.
There you go. No doubt. It's good to get the confirmation. You're like, all right, cool. I can I don't have to censor myself.
Yeah. All right. So you are my friend Dom. We have been working together on and off at different companies for God knows how long. I want to
It's
say
been
at
a
least
while.
6 years, if not more.
Mhm.
Might actually, it's more than that. It's probably like eight or more now that I think about it.
Yeah, I
We're
think it's
getting
like
old.
8 or 9 years. Like when I started working at 10 Up. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Jeez. Okay. Oof. Yeah. For
I
me,
know.
that's like 3 kids ago, I think.
That's how we measure time these
Yeah.
days, man. Is how many kids ago was that?
Yeah. When people ask, I'm just like, I'm 4 kids old. Like, oh God, let me
Like
get you a
you
chair.
are. Yeah. Get you some water. You okay?
Yeah. So give anybody who ends up watching this a little idea of who you are, who is Dom, and kind of the things that you've done that you're most proud of in your career and what you're doing right now. Just kind of like your essence, if you will.
Sure. So I am Dominic Magnifico.
Real
I
name.
That is my real name. I have to confirm that to people more often than you think. Um, my spiel usually starts with me saying that I've been doing web development stuff for almost a decade, but thinking it's more than that now. Just us talking about how long we've been doing this stuff. Um, been doing web development stuff for over a decade now. Mostly front end web development. Kind of started in the WordPress world. Um, Worked with a lot of great people in that space. Ended up starting my own agency 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago now. Um, Kind of in an effort to move away from traditional agency stuff. We all kind of get to a point at agencies where it just feels like there's an upper, like a ceiling, a limit, right? Especially when we're trying to like creatively code and stuff like that. So the impetus for starting my own little studio here was pretty much just to subvert all of that, not deal with leadership that's potentially a little bit far removed from product work, and just do things the way that we wanted to do them. So honestly, I mean, talking about what I'm like most proud of in my career is just legitimately taking the jump to doing my own thing and kind of working for myself. Uh, Everyone's aware that that's a terrifying prospect and something that scares a lot of people, and it continues to be that way as you work through it.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's me.
So what, let's say for your work that you're doing now and breaking off, you break a lot of the like, and for those who work in-house and haven't worked agency before, the thing about agency is your margins are based on this very small gap between what people are willing to pay and what you have to pay for talent, which is a really hard game to play. And when Don mentioned like hitting a wall, there's like you hit a wall or a ceiling in terms of what you can earn in an agency setting for that company to still be profitable. You hit a ceiling in terms of how big that agency is scaling up and whether or not there's room for advancement, or you have to wait till they grow a certain amount. And then there's also like a ceiling of exhaustion where you're like, I could really use a break and some focus, and you get to that. And everybody kind of hits that. Some people go back because they miss it. Some people find different flavors and try things out. How did you approach, with House of Giants, going into it as a small team, knowing you're going to do things differently? Like, what did you prioritize differently that you didn't feel like you could before that? Like, what were your kind of top values?
I think the biggest thing that it was both something that made us successful to an extent and also something that was very difficult to do was just being very choosy with who we worked with. When you're working in an agency, a lot of times it's just they cast a wide net. They got a bunch of salespeople that are just out there grinding sales. And more often than not, it felt like, it was tough to work with clients. There was just too much red tape. There wasn't a lot of like creative freedom or leeway to like explore and learn and do stuff. You kind of just had to fit into a box and do the work,
Yeah,
which is the exact opposite of how I like to work. So,
exactly.
um, yeah, being choosy with who we worked with, just making sure we were working with good people that had similar, moral values that we had, um, and just generally like people that we want to have like a beer with and just like hang
Right.
out and talk about what they did. It's really all about just finding people that are passionate about what they're doing, and that passion rubs off on anyone that's around you. So really seeking that stuff out, I think, is what kind of it made it work initially, for sure.
Yeah. It's that spark or passion that you mentioned is it's kind of all the difference with teams that you're working on too. I feel like where if you have people who are literally just there, like give me the tickets and I'll do the work, it takes a lot
Mhm.
of fun out of it. And it's really easy to get in a mental state where you tune it out. And on the other side, it's like from a leadership standpoint or a client standpoint or whatever, that team is not doing the best work they could. So like you have the efficiency thing, and then you have like basically take your order and deliver it. And I
Yep,
know those for you and I, that's never been the right like project or the right team or the right customer to engage with. And like you said, it's a big step, I think, a mature step to be able to say, yeah, this isn't how I want to spend my time anymore, regardless of who's paying me or whatever, right? Like this isn't the job I want to do, or this isn't how I want to spend my time. So making a change is a big step in the right direction. Um,
absolutely.
so based on the projects you've worked on, let's talk about teams for a second. If you were forming like your ideal X-Men or Avengers or super team or whatever, how what are the teams you've worked with? Like, what makes a team feel really good across the board? Who would be on that team, or what kind of personalities do you even think like you'd look for to fit in?
For sure. I think anytime you and I talk about this, Mike, I think there's a specific project that comes to mind when we talk about like a super team and who was on it. The project itself wasn't a super project, but the team was a solid team.
Yeah,
I think the general the general makeup of a team that's like a super team is just, again, it boils down to people that really enjoy what they're doing, so their field, their expertise, it's that passion that I think we're kind of all seeking. And when you get a group of people that have even a semblance of that, it doesn't have to be like someone's like super gung-ho about their job and stuff like that. It's just people that enjoy what they're doing. um, that is the basis of the makeup of a really good team. But I mean, it also boils down to like communication, and like transparency about stuff. So if one side of the puzzle is struggling with something, bringing in other people, whether it's a project manager, the product owner, or like an engineer or something like that, and being like, hey, I'm not sure how to think through this right now, like let's get together and talk through things. So it's a combination of openness to collaboration, so people that are just like willing to work with each other, a passion for what they're doing, and a respect for what like the other positions are doing, and then yeah, just like transparency and communication, I think, is what makes a team really click.
one thing that I really valued, what I realized after I left 10 Up even was having people that you trust to call you on your bullshit too.
Totally.
Um, Part of the reason I brought Tom with to the company I'm at right now too is like when you step into an environment where everybody is nice, and it's like they either just don't acknowledge what needs to happen, like you don't know if they got it or not, or you throw something out there like, hey, can here's an idea, like what's the right way to go about this, and they just said, sure, I can do that, and you're like, no, I don't think that was the right answer. I'm just trying to start the conversation. Like, please don't do what I said. I don't even remember what it was, right? And like
For sure.
on that project and other projects, I remember there's like a healthy tension of like, no, Mike, this is actually very concerning beyond what you're thinking. Like, don't oversimplify it. Here's why we need to take it seriously. Or hold
Totally.
on, don't go down this route that the client just said they were high. They're not going to remember it tomorrow. Like,
that, that is a legitimate problem that we had. There's no
right,
doubt.
right. So, but I think that trust, like you said, the passion, and when I think about this, like the right team depends on what you're building, right? You need people with different skills.
Totally.
But in those roles, there's like different archetypes or whatever, but I think like that passion for what you're doing, the focus on solving the problems, and then the trust piece is also really important to say like they've got this. Like they're gonna go work on this. I don't need to know what's happening in the brain or behind the scenes. Like they're gonna come back and I know it's gonna be taken care of or they've thought it through or whatever. We don't need
Yeah.
to hover, right? We don't need to like step on each other's toes, or we don't even need to worry about toes in general because we like get in a good flow of how to work together and who's going to own what and when we're going to come back and collaborate and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's a fine balance to find too, because I mean, you need people that are like you said, kind of open to criticism or critique. You know, where if you're trying to find a solution for a problem and you're just talking through stuff, you know, from a design standpoint, being like, hey, that's not super great UX. There's a couple different ways that we can figure that out. And then presenting solutions based on those, you know, critiques or criticisms or whatever, um, is huge. And that all boils down to the trust and the respect of like other people's expertise, um, which, you know, I think the other part of what makes a good team is also having a good, you know, client on the other side of it too, that has that mutual respect for what you're doing and the
Mhm.
trust in you to make those decisions, rather than feeling like they have to be dictating constantly the work that needs to be done or how something needs to function and stuff like that. So um I think, yeah, that might be a a weird different offshoot of like what makes a good team, but I do think it's partially the client itself too.
Yeah, in the services space, I have like right now, I have a unicorn client that I never thought existed and never would exist. It's actually
For
the
sure.
whole founding team is fantastic, but the CPO, um, very experienced, like constant pulse on how the team is feeling and how we're progressing, doesn't like is respectful of everybody's time, trust them, is eager to learn. Like when she was first starting,
Awesome.
she was asking a lot of questions. The team's like, why is she worried about all this? And she wants to understand like how to think about her own product that we're building for her, right? Like she wants to own
Yep.
this. It's a good thing. And then like what I noticed is as the we basically got a whole chunk of the product done in 6 weeks for this marketing demo that launched this week. And as we were going, anything where the team was like, that's a little more complicated than we thought, or like that's probably going to push it, or we might at night, she would just take it out. She'd cut the scope herself and remove it from the demo. And she'd be
Dang.
like, I don't want you guys to worry about it. I don't want you to stress about it. Let's focus and do the thing that we're building really well. And we can make compromises. And even days where things were tight and we were trying to get bugs out and we're having deployment issues, whatever, she's like, hey, if there's anything we can do for a workaround, if there's anything we can like compromise on and do as a fast follower, like, let me know. I'm totally open to it. I was like,
That's
geez.
incredible.
Yeah.
You're not wrong in that being like a unicorn client that never exists. Like someone going in themselves for their product and cutting scope to like help you out is that's a dream, man.
Actually, she's in Denver. I'll introduce you to later now that I'm thinking about it. I totally did not
Heck
make
yeah,
connect the dots on that, but you definitely grab a beer. You would get along.
no doubt. That's awesome.
Um, so one of the questions I had on this, and I can think of a few cases, but like I said, we were talking earlier. One of the things I'm focusing on is how the disciplines that go, all the different people and that play into like actually building products, platforms, websites, whatever, they play a bigger role in it than most people see. Like a lot of people give product managers or whoever a lot of credit, a focus of being the decision maker, but all the different team members kind of collaborate and sometimes in really unexpected ways. I know you and I probably had many cases of this, but I'm wondering if there's an example or you can think of a time where like you've tagged somebody in or ended up just talking to that person who ended up helping you. Like maybe it was you were talking to UX like Ben Grace or something, and you're talking about
Oh yeah.
something or just talking out loud and they like give you an idea that unlocks it. Or maybe you're talking to, I don't know, somebody that's doing QA or a project manager working on the timeline or something like that. And you've been like, I know from my perspective, you've been like, hey, why don't we just do this? Or we've got some budget left. Like, what if I'd really love to go put this polish on this experience or whatever, right? Things like that, where
Totally.
it's like, hey, that's fantastic. And those are collaboration points that usually get overlooked or forgotten about, or like people don't invite, but there's a ton of value. So I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you can think of any.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times what it ends up being is, especially the way that I work and being a part of such a small team now, and really being by, you know, being the sole developer on projects these days, it a lot of the unexpected collaboration kind of comes towards the end, or like during like QA. and stuff like that, or if there's like a specific problem, right? So like if you know you bring in the client or you bring in a project manager or even someone with like UX capability and stuff like that, um, and you talk through a problem that you're having, and it feels like the most complicated thing in the world because you're like, geez, how am I gonna how am I going to mess with like this data structure, and how am I going to make all these API calls to make sure that we're getting the data, like that type of thing. And you bring someone in and they simplify it for you because it's just like a fresh set of eyes. I mean, that's happened countless times at every company that I've ever worked for.
It's like
There's a
rubber ducking,
time.
right?
Exactly. There's just a time in every project where you are so far in the weeds that you can't see the forest for the trees, right? You bring someone in with a fresh set of eyes, they look at the problem, they make a suggestion that's like a dead simple suggestion that's like, hey, just do it this way, and that's totally going to work. um I think that's usually like the most like unexpected way that things happen, but it happens so frequently that maybe I should expect it to happen more. But you hate to rely on that to happen when you're in the midst of it. So but yeah, I think a lot of those, it's funny because I can't really think of a time where I was like super surprised by someone like coming into the project and helping me, because I've worked with so many like fucking cool people,
Yeah.
like in my lifetime. Um, so like anytime I reach out to folks that I know have a good perspective, have a good handle on the project or the technology or what they're doing, and or just generally good people, they always come through and help and find a way to be like, hey, let's talk through this problem and work through it together. So um yeah, yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of that one.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you surround yourself with awesome people, then I guess it's not really a surprise as much as like just knowing you have that fallback, right? Like,
For
hey,
sure.
can you talk through this with me for a second? Or I'm slamming my head against the desk, and like, can you just listen to me and make sure I'm not insane before I
Yep.
before I try to move this thing forward or tap out or whatever. It's like communities, like not online community like everybody thinks about, but just true close community and
Community.
support kind of thing.
Absolutely. It speaks a little bit to one of the other questions that you sent over to me. It was like recognizing when you are spinning your wheels is super important, just as a person working in product, right? Or just generally on client work or whatever. Just recognizing when you are spinning your wheels and tapping someone in and being like, hey, I need a fresh set of eyes on this to kind of help me work through it. Um, Finding people like that you can trust to you know come in and help work through those things with you is massive.
Yeah, on the manager side of it, I know for me, when I see teams where it's like, oh, our tech lead is spending, 4 hours a day on calls with the DevOps or like infrastructure or whatever. I'm like, why? Like, yeah, we need a little engineering, but that shouldn't be what's happening here. And they're like, oh, we're just running into some weird bugs or weird issues and how to set this unique thing up. I'm like, but do you know the infrastructure better than that person? Or are you just kind of there for moral support? And like, not that you can't be part of it, but that responsibility of being a tech lead, sometimes like they have to be everywhere doing everything, and try to talk them out of it, but also that like wisdom to say, hey, I can take a crack at this and get a starting point if it makes it easier. Like I'm pretty
Oh, for
much a
sure.
generalist, right? Like I can start documentation, I can start like a general approach to something or a template or whatever, and then like at some point somebody's got to fill it in or it's garbage. And I just tell people that.
Yep.
Like, and so there's like, if it will help you, I'll take a crack at it just to get it
Hmm.
moving because I've got the time to do it. Otherwise, like your work is going to be 10 times better than mine, and I'm not even going to try.
For sure. It's definitely one of those. I mean, especially when you're like, hey, I approach it from an engineering perspective, obviously, but like if you're mentoring someone like a developer or whatever, and or you're even just working on a project with a peer, um, there has to be a balance between like rubber ducking. You just like getting some support and being like, hey, I need to talk through this with you, um, and passing work off and being like, hey, I can't figure this out, like I need
Yeah.
you to do it, like I just can't
Yeah.
I just can't figure this out. There's I I've run into that all too frequently, and it's one of the most frustrating things in the world to me because like I'm happy to help. I've my entire life been a people pleaser, right? Like I
Yep.
want to make sure everybody's happy. Um, and if you're running into a problem, I absolutely want to help you solve that problem, but I'm not going to give you the answer.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you look? Did you try?
that is the biggest thing that is so hard to ask someone without sounding like a dick.
I've
It's
gotten
like
really good at this because my kids, my older
yeah,
ones
Jay,
especially.
for sure. You kind of have to approach it like that because you don't want to come off like you're accusing them of not trying, but at the same time you got to be like, hey, did you like how deep into this did you go? Like, why don't
Yeah.
you did take a couple stabs at it and then come back to me and tell me what you tried, so that when
Right.
we do start collaborating, I don't then start from scratch and start at the
Yeah.
same spot that you did, and then we go through the whole thing again.
Yeah.
um that's massive for for a team, for a project, for prolonged relationship
Yeah.
with someone. It's massive to have that communication at least.
And from leveling up perspective too, if you aren't showing how you're thinking about it, then you're not getting the kind of feedback and direction that will make you, that's like the stuff that will unlock you like 10x versus like incremental one thing at a time. Because it's, oh, I see you went this way and then you tried this. You were actually on the right track here. You missed one thing. Here's what that one
Yep,
thing was, and here's how to think about it. Otherwise, like you don't know, you guess, and then the takeaway from it for that person is, oh, I have to go do it this other way, and they never actually realized maybe they had a great idea or maybe they were on the right track. And so it's that mentorship piece of learning is very much a like, sh- I hate saying show your work because I was definitely the guy in high school with the math teacher who's like, why didn't you show your work? Like, because I did it in my head. Like, you didn't do it in here. I'm
for
like, I'll
sure.
do it right now. I did it in my head and I didn't want to write the whole thing out because I write big and there's not enough room on the paper. Like, do I need to explain the whole thing? Like, I can do it now. Right. Like,
Yep,
I had that argument on and on. But I do think like your thought process, especially if you're working async or like remote and everything with people, like showing people what you've done, how you thought about something, what you've tried, like that makes a big difference instead of starting from scratch, which is just pulls everybody into the wrong thing. And when everybody starts from scratch, it's just a lot of noise piling on top of each other.
yeah. That's the way I've chosen throughout my career to like hire people too, is like I back in the day I fell into the trap of like, hey, whiteboard out this entire HTML like page for me. But obviously as I've gotten older and valued my time and people's time a little bit more, I pretty much just focus on people that show an interest in what they're doing. Just like show me how you got to where you got. Like my favorite interview question is like, talk to me about a challenging like piece of functionality that you built, and what your thought process was, and kind of like how you arrived at the solution, for that thing. Because it understanding people's thought process just makes communication and collaboration and just insight into what they're doing so much easier. It just feels better to approach it from that direction.
Yeah, I have one of my similar ones is basically like, what's something complex that you tried to solve and failed, and what did you take away from it? Because
That's great.
I don't work with people that actually have as many tangibles like writing code and stuff, right? Like I'm not going to ask them about,
Sure.
did you get better feedback on one doc versus another when you're writing requirements or whatever? Like I'm going to
Yeah.
ask like from your mental model, like when you're approaching this scenario or some complex approach to requirements. Like I keep using the example of something we built recently was we're using AI for voice to voice. And
Mm.
when you start thinking about like realistic as a requirement and you break down how humans talk to each other and what they process in that, and especially if you were to factor like the visual,
Oh yeah.
um, it's like body language, gestures, eye contact, tone, pauses. We actually, in one of the products we launched, when we started it, we fixed it before we launched, but the pause for the person was set to 1 second. So if they paused for 1 second, it would stop recording, it would transcribe it, send it to the LLM. And we were testing it. We're like, then when I remembered what I was going to say or start on the next thing, the LLM had already sent another response. And then I paused because it was talking over me and I didn't know what to do. And then it started again. So
Sure.
it created like a really bad interruption loop. I'm like,
Oh no,
but the
yeah.
but the difference between 1 second and 2 seconds is huge. So it's
Totally.
like, was it 1.5 seconds? Was it 1.75? It was like, it was this nutty thing where the engineer was like, okay, you sure you don't want to go with 1.63? I'm like, no, we're good. You know, like
Yeah,
this is fine for
that's
now.
such a crazy thing to have to like quantify, is like how much time between a person stopping talking is enough to be like, okay, they're done speaking. Because like
Yeah.
especially when you talk to, you know, people that do like public speaking and stuff like that, the general consensus is like, if you can't think of what to say in that moment, just be quiet until you can think of the thing, right? Like instead of filler words, you know,
Yeah.
like saying like or you know, whatever.
Right.
So yeah, I imagine that was exceptionally challenging to figure
It
out
was,
that timing.
yeah. We figured it out. It was good, but at first they thought it was a looping bug where the LLM was just firing randomly. I'm like, no, no, no. I can recreate this. And it's just if I pause to take a breath or if I need to
Yep.
think about, because engineers were testing it like it was a conversation thing. So it'd be like, how are you today? Good. I want to sell you something. Okay. Why do I need it? You know, the LLM would try to start the conversation. They'd just be like, the one of the engineers tested was like, I want to sell you a pen because you have to sign contracts. Like that was their testing. And then we're over here, the CPO and I are like very complex sales scripts of like, we have this software and it solves this problem. And I heard from somebody that you were leading a conversation about this. And like, so we find all these bugs and like long versus short responses, pause times, and all this stuff. And you're like, wow, it's
Yeah.
easy to tweak with AI, which is cool. But like going through requirements like that and thinking you got it right and then realizing how many things you missed in human conversation, like people are complex machines. I'll tell you what.
There's no doubt.
That was a derail a little bit, still relevant, but
Absolutely.
um, so we were talking about team collaboration a little bit more. We talked about a lot of the positives. Obviously that's not always the case because stress piles in pretty quickly when you get, especially when you get close to the finish line. How do you handle like, or how do you think about conflict in terms of whether it's people who just consistently don't try and try to shuck off the work, or it's people who are introducing problems without solutions, or um, whatever the case. There's a million different things that could happen, right? Like usually you have good culture, good team, you can work through a lot of that stuff, but inevitably some conflict comes from somewhere, right? Like how do you think about that when you still have to work with those people and ship the thing?
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of comes down to, you know, those same principles of like transparency and collaboration. Like if there's a conflict, if someone's not pulling their weight or doing something in a way that's, you know, detrimental to the team or the project or something like that, you have to talk it out sooner rather than later. Because if you kind of, and you know, this has happened to me before, if you kind of just let it go, and you know, my brain is very conflict averse. So you know, I see something like that and I'm like, okay, I'll pick up that slack. Like I'll, you know, do one thing or another to just keep things moving. And, you know, I always give people the benefit of the doubt too. It's like, oh, maybe they had a bad day. Maybe it's just one of those things where it's like, ah, they're off, you know, whatever. The problem with that approach, as I've learned, is that people take advantage of that. They start to expect that you'll just be there to pick up the
Yeah,
slack. And it creates a super unhealthy like boundary relationship between, you know, you and members of your team or whatever. Because then it's again just expected. If something's not working, if something falls short or whatever, it's like, oh, Dom will pick it up. Like Dom's got it. So you want to avoid that at all costs.
right.
If you see something happening like that, the best course of action is to just be like, hey, you know, let's have a discussion, and then, you know, get to the bottom of it. And it very well could be like, you know, I got some stuff going on in my personal life, whatever. This is why things are, I'm dropping the ball here or there. And then you work through it. You know, you say, hey, I'm here to support you as much as you need, but once you're back, let's make sure you're back, you know,
Right. And doing
and
it
that type of
early
thing.
also gives you more time to find a solution that's not just you. Because
Yep.
I've found this because like I've done the same thing you have, right? Where it's like, I'll just pick that up and run with it. That's fine. And then in the end of it, it's like, especially in bigger companies or agencies where it's like the perspective of you picking it up and run with it ends up being like, and things didn't get done as well as they could. Like, what? Who was going to do it if I just let it drop? Right. Like
For sure.
you
At
solve a
least it got
problem.
done.
Right. But like the the outside perspective is, and it's not wrong, is what I realized about this. I used to get super defensive about it, but it's not wrong because the best option would have been you realize somebody wasn't going to be able to pull through early on. And instead of you trying to pick up the slack for them, you adjusted the team, you adjust the expectations, whatever, right? Like that's not always an option in different environments, but ideally, if you have that conversation first, you can say, okay, well, like that means I need to solve for this, right? Like if I can't count on you in this point in time to do this thing, that's okay. Like I'll support you. But that means I also have to figure out this other solution. And I might need your help making that work or whatever.
For sure. Yeah, it's a give and take thing. You need to, like any relationship you have, right? Like it needs to be a healthy balance of like, hey, I'm happy to help you, but down the line, we lean on each other rather than just being the only person that ever picks up the slack and then you get burnt out and then it becomes a problem and then the team dynamic festers and becomes a problem and then you run into real issues. So yeah, early and often conversations when you start running into conflict is the way to go.
What does your, let's call it a team flow state look like? Not just your personal one, right? Because everybody has their own routines for getting in that, but like when you feel like things are in a groove, like people are communicating, you're able to do the work and put the right time into it, you have clarity on what you do. Like, what does that look like to you?
Oh man, that's a really good question because it feels like it's been so long since it's just everything's gone smooth, because there's always,
Yeah.
especially when you do client work like I do, it's
It's
it's one
it,
thing after another.
it's
But
a genuine rarity because there's so many different scenarios of like kicking it off is awkward, you don't have the clarity you need, and then like you have a lot of tension in figuring it out and who's going to do what, and then there's like a brief window before the thing is done and you get to testing and getting it out the door,
yep,
making any changes where it's like everybody's aligned, everybody's feeling good and in a group. Usually that's like it's not an entire project, it's like a period
for
of
sure.
time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the period after, like immediately after, like a requirements meeting, where like, okay, let's say you do like the requirements meeting for this large feature that you're going to build for a client or whatever. You have all of this stuff laid out. You've gone through the iterations. You've talked to the client and figured out, okay, here's what's MVP. Here's what we're going to start with, and now we're ready to go. That like beginning starting point I think is probably my favorite part of any project because there's so much that needs to be done, but you know exactly what it is. You know the pieces of the puzzle. You know where you're going to start, and you can kind of just go. So from like a design and UX standpoint, like you've got the designs, you've got everything laid out with all of the various states that it exists in, especially if you're working on like a web app where it's like here's the empty state for this thing that you're doing and stuff like that. um that I think is the ideal like flow state, and everybody has their tasks, their tickets that they're working on, their features that are bucketed out for them. And then the way that I've worked most recently for like the past 4 years or so is super small team pathing like pull requests back and forth to each other. So I finish my thing, I do my own internal like QA and all of that type of stuff, push it up to a staging environment, pass it over to another engineer. They look at it, they do a good QA on it, and they say, hey, looks great, or here's a couple of things that need to change. And then just going back and forth with that for as long as you possibly can would be like my ideal situation for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like the small team dynamic. I mean, I appreciate bigger teams when everybody can like divide and conquer in some of the problems and keep momentum moving and communicate back and forth. But I think like inside those little bubbles of like getting something done, the the AI stuff has been fun for me because I don't have to learn code, but at the same time, like
And
I'm doing something more technical with cycles that's more like that. Like I started we're putting the prompts into GitHub for iterations instead of like copying and pasting text back and forth. So it's
oh,
just like a
cool, that's a good
JSON
idea.
file. Yeah, it's just like a JSON file or Markdown sometimes or whatever. But like then we have versioning because we would
For
have like
sure.
a lot of different feedback on very subtle things that are like, I need to change 4 words in one line of this prompt, but I like if I kept doing that, you wouldn't remember which one was which, even put the date on it, copy paste, whatever, it gets messy. So been
Yeah,
doing that more, and the testing cycles are a lot faster, which is great for ADHD and me because I can be
for
like,
sure.
go into GPT and get in focus mode. And like for the product we were working on, I would just for scoring or evaluating or whatever, I would just give it transcript after transcript and like look at the quality and consistency. Or for like the dialogue thing, I just have to get that mental state, but I'd tweak the prompt, test it, whatever, run another one, think I found a problem, go fix it, come back and do it, and be able to work with like our head of AI and stuff. So
Mhm.
it's like a version of development without having to write the code, which is nice. I get a little bit more
Totally.
sense for that like dynamic back and forth versus just, the closest thing to that before is probably working with designers in Figma and being like, hey, what about this thing? We're missing the state. What happens when you click on this? And just kind of like that pass back.
Yep, absolutely.
What do you think people, I'm going to vary from the questions because I realize there is some covering, so I'm going to keep you on your toes. What do you
Totally.
think, what do you think people take for granted about what you learned during the process of building something? Like something you said this earlier, which I was going to comment on, is that state right after you have it, everything, and you just go. There's a lot of people who don't actually know how to just go.
Oh, for sure.
So, what are
It's
some of the skills or things that you think you learn and pick up and develop one way or another that are like valuable that people don't necessarily appreciate?
it it 100% has to be like the initial like project management and organization of those things. So like the tasks and stuff that you need to do, having those laid out for you and documented and written somewhere in a place that you can track their status and all of that type of stuff. Um, we for 4 years have not had a project manager, and we finally brought on a project manager on a contract basis for one of our bigger clients. And it's a game changer because I don't have to worry about like taking technical notes during our like engineering calls and stuff like that. If we say, hey, this needs to be a task, someone's already writing it down for us and documenting it, organizing it, all of that type of stuff. So when you work on a team, I think one of the things that I definitely took advantage of was just the fact that there were people there organizing what needed to be done, and I could just pick and choose what I needed to do. There's obviously some like order to things that need to be done from an engineering perspective, but at the very least, I could start someplace and see the path forward.
Yep.
And then as things changed or requirements changed, or if the client had a call with the stakeholders or whatever, those things were just documented for us. We had to adapt, and sometimes that was frustrating, but um, at least you didn't have to sit in those meetings and also take those notes and then also figure out where to document it and how to change things, the timeline, and all of that.
Right.
Um, Doing everything by yourself is exceptionally hard. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of people probably take advantage of that.
Decision fatigue and even just information processing is like a real thing that wears you down. We were talking about this today. My company actually talked about it for weeks of like the frustrating thing with project managers is there are a number of them out there that get certifications, they work in-house at big orgs that are slower paced, and they kind of just expect the person to check the boxes in terms of like, yeah, maybe send out notes, maybe schedule a call with people when it needs to be, and kind of like be order takers essentially is how they operate. And
Yeah,
then in the environments where you really need them to like to jump in, and especially with clients where it's like you need to have instincts on how that client's feeling, you need to be able to like think ahead about something the client said and how that might impact the team and what the team's thinking about and prioritizing, and like pay attention to all these different pieces. Like really good project managers are invaluable. But there's
100%.
so many of them out there that don't add a lot of value, where like the general consensus, like I can't tell you how many times people be like, do we really need project management on that? I'm not doing it.
Yeah, I promise you we do. It's
Yep.
it's tough because especially in the technical space that we work in, it's hard to find a project manager that has the intuition to be able to like translate,
Yep.
what needs to be done. It's kind of like you said, sometimes the project manager that you're working with is, like you said, an order taker. And I've had situations where like, project manager comes to me with a question from the client. I say it back to them in a way that I'm like, this should kind of make sense, but I'm also, a developer and I'm probably speaking too technically or whatever.
Right.
Um, and too often they just like copy and paste that response. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that really
Yeah.
wasn't like exactly what needed to be said to the client at the time, but
Yeah.
I guess here we are. So yeah, a good project manager on a project is 100% invaluable.
Sure. All right. Here's one for you off the rails a little bit more positive, less heavy in terms of like past experience, team building and stuff. But what are you most excited about building with right now?
In terms of like technology and stuff like that.
Could be, let's say, instead of building with, let's just say building, like whether it's a new market you're getting into, a new format you're getting into, a new technology you're playing with. Like, I know you mentioned you're doing some product work now in some spaces. And it's like the thing I tell people too, and I don't mean to rant, but if you look at 10 Up and the stuff that we built, much more complex than a lot of products that exist out there
Yep.
today, like basic apps and things like that. So it's like we are doing website development, but like very complex. And in some cases, we were doing app development and some other things too. So
Yep.
like all that experience counts, whether or not people acknowledge that looking at your resume or whatever, right? But it's like
Sure.
we built a lot of different things. You continue to build a lot of different things, but like what based on either things that are coming in right now or things that you're starting to get a taste for, play around with, or look into, like if you could choose your next dream project that came in, or if you had like a say like some time to just put your own time into something new, what would that be right now? What are you excited about?
I have uh I have two competing like passions within me. So the world that I live in right now is kind of that product world. It's like a long-term relationship with a client that has a web application that we're building out. Um, I love seeing the evolution of that. It's very cool to like build new features, refactor old stuff, and do things better using technology that's like interesting and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Um, so I've grown to very much enjoy the functional aspect of my job, like building something that works.
Yep.
Um, but on the other side of things, the projects that like get me excited are the ultra creative, like super out of the box weird websites. Um, and the only one that comes to mind right now that I've done recently is the Shaky Grave site.
Oh, yeah.
Um, he the ideal world that I live in is a project like that that does not have a crazy timeline, like a deadline that I need to hit that gives me ample opportunity to like explore and research and find the right ways to do things rather than finding a way to do it and hope that it works. Um, but
Well, I'm
those,
gonna do this real
those
quick too, because I'm gonna bring this thing up because this is super cool. I know the audio and stuff is not gonna come through, but the just
yeah,
some of the things that are on here, even the keyboard nav that you did with the scrolling, I
it
closed
it
that
was
already because
so
I
much
started
fun,
using it.
man.
This is so
It
cool.
it's it was just such an interesting project because this is a musical artist with creativity himself. He had a very specific vision and direction for what he wanted. I got to play around with like some 3D um, you know, libraries and stuff like that that I hadn't gotten to work with in the past and stuff like that. So it's these types of projects that really go out of the box um, make me excited. They're so much fun. I am a front end developer at heart. So anything that involves like cool JavaScript and CSS paired together, I'm down for. So
Dude.
those are the types of things. But it's so weird because lately, I mean, I really enjoy just being able from front to back to be able to build an application basically. So like using Next.js and all of these like React based frameworks and stuff like that that I've been living in for the past like year and a half now. Um, it feels very good to build a feature from start to finish and see it work. So I get a lot of satisfaction out of that too. But if I were to choose, it would it would probably be building something for myself, like an application for myself that I knew everything that needed to happen, and I could just chunk it out one piece at a time, without anyone looking over my shoulder or like
Yeah, yeah.
saying, "Hey, when is this going to be done?" and stuff like that.
We're gonna build something together one of these days.
I look
I mean,
forward very much to that day.
for fun, I mean, we've already built
I
stuff together, obviously.
100%. No, yeah. Once, hey man, if you come up with an idea where you're like, shoot, Dom could build this for me, you just let me
Oh
know
yeah,
because that's where I live now.
I got you. So many ideas. You know, the interesting thing about this too, because you mentioned web, like website versus product and stuff, like applications are heavier and there's a place for them, especially in B2B. In the B2C space was really interesting if you look at different formats and platforms and like how people are selling, how people are creating. Like, I mean, there's part of the reason I chose the newsletter platform I'm on is because there's multiple newsletters on that A scaled up because of the way they built their monetization platform. They were essentially making
Mhm.
money while growing their audience, and B had exits. Like they sold for millions of dollars and it was just a newsletter. And
That's
there's
crazy.
multiple stories of this like popping up all over the place. I'm like, it is. You have an audience, your content is a product, you have a platform that you're building on or whatever, but essentially like the concept of a product, it really is like multi-format, right? It doesn't have to be like a software product doesn't have to be an application, whether it's web or mobile or both or whatever.
Yep.
And then even in the B2C or B2B space, like there's different layers of that. Like you create products from people that create other things, right? And that maybe are end products of their own and different versions of them. But I would consider like the Shaky Graves thing, like if you were to wrap that in an app that people had to log into, it would be a digital product, right? Like especially with the
Totally.
AI piece tied to it and everything, like
Yeah.
there's mobile apps that do less than that people would call that. And the crazy thing is like there's product teams and managers that own like the tiniest pieces of these bigger applications, which is
Sure.
like not to say they're not important, especially when it's scaled up at the enterprise level, there's millions of people using it or whatever. But I would be so bored. Like there are people whose entire job is to optimize login screens.
Yeah. There gets to be a point, yeah, and I think like almost every developer has made this transition between, agency work and product work. But you go through cycles, right? There's like it's cool to see a product grow and be responsible for a smaller subset of things and not have, the burden of the entire application on your shoulders, right? But at a certain point it's just like, okay, cool, you know we're just responsible for optimizing these 9 text boxes and a modal. um I can see how that would get boring.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you just the walls and the bounds. I think there's a happy place in between. And then the most people when they start hitting the walls there, it's time to go on your own and build something.
Exactly.
Well, buddy, I appreciate your time. We can call that good for today. Like I said, I'm not
Hell yeah, man.
gonna formally podcast this or whatever it is the kids do, but I'm gonna chunk it up into videos. We can share them out and circulate and hopefully share some wisdom out with the world.
Beautiful. That's all I could ever hope for.
Appreciate your time, man.
Always, man. Anytime.